Ciao ragazzi, allora oggi premetto che sarà una diretta un po' diversa perché abbiamo un ospite speciale, abbiamo uno special guest stasera e che sarà l'autore di In alto nel buio, Sequoia Nagamatsu e vi avverto già che la diretta sarà totalmente in inglese perché l'autore è americano e quindi sì, voi mi sentirete parlare un po' in inglese, mi sentirete un po' com'è la mia pronuncia. Infatti ho una paura di fare tipo una bruttissima figura e tipo magari sbagliare tantissimo l'inglese, ma nel caso sorridiamo e annoiamo, ragazzi. Adesso aspettiamo solo che entri. Entrerà col profilo della casa editrice Neri Pozza. Ecco, ragazzi, io cercherò di cavarmela, ok? Cercherò di fare il massimo per riuscire a entrare. Se vedete che ho le labbra un po' lucide, no, invece non si vede perché da me da lontano sembrava di sì. Ok, è arrivato, ragazzi. Vediamo se riesce ad entrare. Ho percepito l'ansia. No. Ok, allora, innanzitutto io qui ho le mie domande e ho il libro. Questa qua è la versione in italiano in alto nel buio e vediamo se riesce ad entrare l'autore, se il signor Nagamatsu riesce ad entrare. Vediamo. Oh mio Dio. Vabbè, intanto finché non entra, vi parlo un pochino, un attimo della trama. Allora, In alto nel buio è un romanzo che unisce la fantascienza con praticamente il romanzo della narrativa contemporanea. Aspettate che mi ha rimandato la richiesta. Ok, I think it, I think uh, oh my god, hi, do you hear me?
Hi, me okay?
Yeah, how
Yes.
are you?
I'm good. I'm good.
Oh my god, so glad to meet you. Oh my god, that's, that's such an honor for me.
Oh, yeah. Honor's all mine. Thank you for having me.
So, in this life, we are going to talk about your book, How High We Go in the Dark. This is the Italian version, In Alto nel Buio, published by the publishing house Neri Pozza. And I want to start telling you that I really loved your book. I was really enchanted during the reading and nothing. Yeah, and I have just a quick questions for you, and it won't take a lot, just to know you better and know better your story. So the first one is your book blends two beloved literary genres, the science fiction and the narratives, and I just want to ask you, what is the idea that the idea in the writing, which is what inspired you to write this book?
I think a few things. I worked on this book for many years, and I think I was first very interested in learning more about how people grieve and move on with life after maybe a family member dies.
Mhm.
And I had been suffering the loss of my grandfather many years ago, and I wasn't able to go to his funeral or say goodbye in a normal way. And I was living in Japan for a couple of years, so I think my grief was influenced by wanting to know more about how other cultures say goodbye and how other cultures deal with death in ways that honor tradition while also looking to the future. So a lot of the stories obviously have to do with death and dying and family and connection. So for many years, I was just focusing on those themes. It wasn't until maybe 2014 or 2015 where I started to think about a virus. And of course, this was before COVID-19. So I was already thinking about the virus and climate change and environmental issues. And I was reading articles about scientists discovering ancient viruses in the ice, in glaciers, and the permafrost. So I thought that I could use that as a frame for some of the work I was already doing. I think once I decided on including climate change and this virus in the book, that was the point where I started to think more about how high we go in the dark as a collection of moments across many generations. Because I never wanted to focus on the virus as the star of the book, right? Once the virus is introduced, we really mostly focus on small moments, on individuals and their life. And even,
I
right,
think that,
exactly.
yeah,
Yeah, yeah.
I really can feel that moments in my skin, like it was my personal problems or like, yeah.
Yeah, and that's essentially the foundation of the book was just, it started with grief and my family and thinking about connection. And I think it evolved from that to think about larger issues, climate change. And I couldn't predict that COVID-19 would happen, but, thinking about how the world responded to COVID-19 is a climate change narrative because for me, in order to move beyond any kind of tragedy, whether that's personal or global or in the scale of a country, it really has to do with community and having empathy for other people.
Yeah. So I think that your novel is a really, really masterpiece, and I love the way that you talk about it. But how long did it take to write it? In,
It's hard to say. Like I didn't work on it concurrently. Like the oldest piece, the oldest chapter in its very early form, I wrote in 2009. But again, I didn't know that I was writing this book, and I would take breaks from writing this project, sometime for a year or two, because this is my second book technically. I wrote a story collection before this.
we're going to talk about we are
Yeah,
going to talk about that
right.
really.
And so and I was in graduate school. I moved. I got married. So life was happening. Apart from this, I think it really wasn't until 2015, 2016, where I really started to think that this was a book, that this was something that resembled maybe How High We Go in the Dark a little bit. And I remember talking to my agent because I already had a lot of these stories, but I wasn't calling it a novel yet, and I think my agent was like, I think this is more than a novel. This is something else. And, that's when, I really started to look at the timeline, the chronology of the book and thinking about what moments were missing, like what other chapters would I need to write in order for this to feel more cohesive. So for example, the first chapter of the book was one of the last chapters I wrote because I already had a lot of the other, like I had moments of reacting to the virus, but I didn't actually introduce the virus. That chapter did not exist. I mentioned that the virus was cured on Earth while we were on a spaceship, light years away. But I didn't have the moment of people waking up from comas and actually going on with their life on Earth. So I needed to write that short chapter. So there was a lot of, I think, it was kind of like a puzzle, for many years of trying to figure out how much I wanted to include, how far into the future I wanted to go. and what that might say about human resilience and how we evolve from an event like
How
COVID-19. Like,
it can
yeah,
change our lives.
exactly.
Some, yeah, oh my God. And I was very moved by your book, especially for the character of Clara.
Mm.
And I admit I became attached to her as well. And how did you come up with the inspiration for this character? One of the most important, for example.
Yeah, I mean, like, I don't want to spoil things too much for people that haven't read the book because Clara is also other characters, right? Clara kind of goes by other names, and so I think the last chapter of the book is very different in a lot of ways from what comes before. It's very cosmic. It occurs. It starts on another planet, and it really kind of spans all of Earth history. Like billions of years go by in the span of like maybe 4,000 words. And one of the characters in this last chapter is associated with the character of Clara. And so for me, in thinking about Clara as we know her in the first chapter, and kind of other versions of Clara in the book, including in that last chapter, I wanted to think about a character who was the most human character in the book, right? And in some ways, I wanted to capture being a human being through the non-human. But if you're just kind of asking me about Clara as she exists in the Miyashiro family, I wanted to picture a parent and a child who understood what was at stake in the world, right? The fact that she saw that her child might not grow up to have a future, right? And certainly her children would not grow up to have a real future. And so she made the sacrifice, as hard as it was, to be away from her family in order to try to be a part of a solution. And I think there was a lot of regret, in the character of Clara. And I think there was a lot of tragic moments with Clara's parents in trying to kind of understand why their daughter made the sacrifice of not being there for her child. So I think ultimately, when I'm thinking about climate change, it is like about, what are we willing to sacrifice in order for our children and the next generation to not make sacrifices that they had no part in, really.
Yeah, because we read about this sacrifice, but we only read it in a book. But we should know that this sacrifice can be just I don't know. So many people did that in the real world, like when COVID comes, or just in a really tragic moments in our lives. Everybody in this world made this sacrifice, and we should just think more about that, I think.
Right. Exactly.
And I love that in your book. Then, How High We Go in the Dark was a great debut. I really want to say that. Would you have ever thought during the writing that this novel could have this result in some way?
I mean, I think every writer dreams, has the dream of that result, right?
That
You,
could
you
be a
don't,
daydream,
right, right. It's a daydream. But there's so many factors that I think go into, there are a lot of books in the world, and a lot of them are deserving of more attention, right? There are brilliant writers who never get an audience, and they deserve that audience. So I can't say that, like, it's just me. It's also the moment, like the fact that this book came out, in 2022, because I think if it came out in 2020, it would have been too soon. If it came out in 2021, it may have been too soon. But I think 2022 allowed people to have some time to think about quarantine about COVID-19. And even though this is not a COVID
There's a lot
novel,
of thoughts
right?
behind.
Like there was time to think about like what kind of person have I become? What has the world become? What happens next? And so it kind of arrived at a very timely moment, I think. And I couldn't have planned that. My publishers couldn't have planned that timing. I think there's also the fact that this novel also exists between genres, that sometimes that can be seen as a disadvantage maybe, but I think it's also an advantage in that it's a literary, some people might see it as literary, it's like literature with a capital L, but it's also science fiction and it's also fantasy, right? So it's a book that kind of offers something to readers that, you know, if you don't want a spaceship in your novel, you might like this one. If you don't want quiet novels, but you want some, you know, some fantasy or some science fiction, you might like this one because you know it's taking bits and pieces of other traditions. So.
This book came out 6 years after your composition of small novels. And do you think that your writing or being a writer in itself have changed in this year, this is 6 years?
Yeah, no, I think certainly. I mean, I think that first book, I think a lot of writers' first books, it's a snapshot of them still learning, and I think we continue to learn and grow and become different writers. You know, it's an evolution, but I think especially with the first book, writers are still very much finding their voice and experimenting with different styles. And that book came out not long after I finished graduate school for creative writing. And so, you know, some of
You were
those
very young.
stories, yeah, I was very young. And so some of those stories were, you know, I think a reflection of me trying to adopt another writer's voice, right? Or another writer's style. And so like from story to story in that first book, you can see there's like a very wide variation of styles and even genres. And I think naturally I'm the kind of writer that likes to experiment and likes kind of existing in between genres. But that book was definitely, you know, apart from all being about Japanese myth and folklore, it was very, maybe it was too diversified, let's just say. And the only thing really holding it together was Japan, was myth, and me writing those stories. I'm proud of that book. That book gave me a lot of opportunities. It gave me an excuse to reach out to other writers and meet people. And it also provided the launching pad for my career in academia. Like I wouldn't be a professor if it weren't for that book. So I think so. Thankful for it, but I think I changed a lot in terms of being more certain of myself and what kind of writing I like. And I think on a line by line level, like a paragraph by paragraph level, I feel like I'm a little bit more assured in what I need to do. That said, you know, as I said earlier, writers evolve, and just because I learned how to write How We Go in the Dark doesn't mean that I don't have to do a lot of work to figure out how to write the next book, because it's going to be very different. So.
Oh my gosh. I'm so excited for the next one.
Mhm.
And this is the last three questions are very simple. There's just which is your favorite character and how high we go in the dark.
Um,
There's a lot of characters
yeah,
I
there's a lot
know,
of
and
characters. I'll say maybe not my favorite. I'll say Dennis, the character of Dennis in Elegy Hotel. So that's the hotel where, you know, the chapter where we have an employee where this hotel is also kind of a funeral home and a mortuary, and people can stay at this hotel and have kind of a long goodbye with their loved ones. This character, I think, is special to me. Maybe he's not my favorite, but he's special to me because I think he reminds me of who I used to be when I was much younger. A character that is running away, that doesn't want to face his problems, that maybe makes the right decision or tries to make the right decision the right decision for his family, to be with his family, to be with friends, to know how to love people. He comes to those decisions and that moment in life sometimes too late. You know, it's kind of tragic that he isn't able to take care of his mother because he made that decision too late, that he didn't call back his brother in time. And that reminds me of me because, you know, when I was in my 20s, I think I was running away from my problems. I didn't really know who I was.
So,
I kind of
writing
escaped.
the characters
Yeah,
make
yeah,
helped you to figure out yourself, or
I think
just
so. Yeah,
some shadows that you're trying to figure it out in the past?
right. And I think that chapter also really helped me in the present. You know, my father died during COVID from cancer, and I hadn't spoken to my father in many years. And so when I was editing this chapter in, you know, during COVID, like 2021, 2020, it was very strange to be revisiting a character who couldn't make the right decision in time to call home so he could say goodbye and take care of his mother. And in my reality, like I had to make the decision, do I call my father, who I don't have a great relationship with, because he's dying? And then ultimately, I think Dennis helped me,
My God, you're making me
yeah,
crying.
yeah, make that decision to call my father. And maybe we didn't have the conversation we needed to have, but I was at least able to say goodbye. Yeah.
This is this is really powerful. Oh my God. And what is your favorite sentence in this book? I'm sorry if I'm rambling, but
Yeah. I mean, off the top of my head, maybe not a sentence, but like I think a scene or a paragraph. Um, it's probably in A Gallery a Century, A Cry of Millennia, which is the spaceship chapter. And there was a moment where the narrator of the story, the grandmother, right, of Yumi, is writing a letter, and she's talking about how they sent ashes, people's ashes, and they put them into space. And they planted like little beacons mixed in with the ashes so that it became like a constellation, that people's remains that they were jettisoned into space have become a constellation. And in some ways, like a lot of the things in the book, like you're kind of reaching for hope. Sometimes characters are literally looking up into the sky and hoping for something better. And here we have kind of our loved ones literally becoming a constellation, becoming the
a really
stars.
poetic way
Yeah.
to do that.
Mm-hmm.
And the last question. Describe your novel in 3 words. I know it's very difficult,
In
but
3 words.
if you want.
Um, I'll say climate, and climate I think can mean many things, right? It can be a big word or it could be a small word. Climate, family, and hope.
My God. Oh God. Yeah. Th- so I think that we finished the questions. My God. And I'm so glad to meet you. I'm so glad to meeting you, and thank you for your time. Thank you for everything that you said. And wow, I hope for the next book.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been a pleasure.
Nothing. Uh, I think that we finished. So, okay. Sorry. Nothing. Bye. Thank you for your time. Bye. Io tipo impanicato alla fine. Ok, ragazzi, questo era l'autore di In alto nel buio, pubblicato da Neri Pozza. È stato molto, molto, molto potente, lo ammetto, perché soprattutto nella parte finale in cui comunque lui ha spiegato che si parlava comunque, si trattavano anche delle vicende personali che l'hanno ispirato, è stato incredibile. L'unica cosa mi dispiace è che alla fine non sapevo proprio come chiudere, io ero lì, ok, ok, e in più lo vedevo abbastanza in imbarazzo, quindi vabbè, tutto panico. Comunque ragazzi, la live è finita, fantastico, e ci vediamo alla prossima live di lettura. Ciao ragazzi.